This is my PC that I built back in 2015, almost 9 years ago. I had no idea when I built it I'd still be using it today. It's a testament to how well modern high-end PC parts age. At the heart of it is the Intel Core i7-4790K. At the time, AMD were essentially selling e-waste electric heaters, and Intel's 4790K was undoubtedly the best gaming CPU on the market. 4 cores and 8 threads was a lot in 2015. Even today, many games don't take advantage of more than 4 cores. Cooling the 88-watt beast is the CryoRig H7, a tower cooler very similar to the incredibly popular Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. Similar designs today will thermal throttle on modern power-hungry hardware, but it was enough back then for a stable 4.5 GHz overclock on all cores. The first mistake I made in parts choice was choosing ITX as the form factor. I had no need for a small form factor PC, and the extra headache during the build process, along with the lack of expandability, was hardly worth it. Luckily, the ASRock Z97 Mini ITX AC has been a rock-solid motherboard otherwise. 16 gigs was a lot of RAM for a gaming PC at the time, but the G-Skill Sniper Gaming dual 8GB DDR3 1866 CL10 kit was very reasonably priced compared to kits rated for 2133 and up. In 2015, NVMe storage wasn't available on consumer platforms, so SATA SSDs were the fastest storage available. Even low-capacity SATA SSDs were prohibitively expensive. So while the 250GB Samsung 850 EVO served as a great boot drive, I added a 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive for bulk storage. Later, when I wanted to dual boot Linux, I installed a 1TB Crucial MX500 SSD, along with another terabyte of hard drive storage. The fastest GPU on the market at the time was the NVIDIA GTX Titan X. I had saved up enough to shell out the required $1,000 for the privilege of owning one, so I was hit with significant buyer's remorse when just a month later NVIDIA released the 980 Ti for $400 less. Luckily for me, modern games use ridiculous amounts of VRAM, and the Titan X's 12 gigs has aged a lot better than the 980 Ti's 6. In 2019, I upgraded to a PowerColor Red Devil 5700 XT. Even though it has 4 gigs less VRAM than the Titan X, it performs significantly better in games while also allowing use of FreeSync and AMD's excellent open-source Linux driver. Unfortunately, it didn't exactly fit in my case, but by leaving out the PCIe slot screws and not fully closing the side panel, I made it work. The OC BIOS setting on the card overwhelmed my Seasonic 80 Plus Platinum 520W fanless power supply, but the silent BIOS setting reined the card in enough to stop OCP from tripping most of the time. Originally, I built this PC in a black Corsair 380T, but just outside the warranty period, the power button stopped working. Shorting pins on the motherboard with a screwdriver became pretty tedious after a while, so I rebuilt the PC in the white BitPhoenix Prodigy you see it in today. A nice upside was that the BitPhoenix Prodigy has an external 5 1/4 inch bay that I filled with a laptop DVD drive and a 3D printed enclosure. Quite handy for ripping CDs. This PC will always be special to me for how well it's performed in the 9 years I've been using it. I'm definitely going to miss it even though it's past time for an upgrade. Before we start building my new PC, let's harvest a few parts I'll be reusing from the old one. Removing the side panel on this case is very straightforward and allows us to get at the first part we need, the GPU. I don't plan on reusing the GPU in the new build, but the 5700 XT is a great upgrade for a lot of people. This case suffers from a real lack of room to work with, so extracting the GPU becomes much more of a chore than it really should be. Usually a tilt of the GPU is enough to get it unstuck, but in this case, there's not really enough vertical height. After finally getting the GPU out, it's time to disconnect the power connectors. You would think this would be pretty straightforward and simple, but when they've been in a card for this long, they become quite a pain to remove. As you can see, I really struggled with this for a few minutes. and I finally managed to extract the card. Next, we need to spin the case around and take off the other side panel. The side panels on this case are only held on with thumb screws, which makes this pretty easy. This side of the case has the front panel connectors, so it's very important to be careful not to break any of the wires when you remove this side panel. This finally lets us get at the second part we're extracting, the secondary SSD. Finally, I have to grab a screwdriver as I actually bothered to screw in all 4 screws holding the SSD into the side panel. Removing the screws and disconnecting SATA power and data finally frees the SSD. Alongside the extracted 1TB Crucial MX500, I've also got another 120GB ADATA SSD from another build. That covers the old parts I'll be reusing, so now it's finally time to get into the new parts that make up this build. AMD's really come a long way in 9 years, and Zen 4's the only platform that really makes any sense for my new PC. While 3D V-Cache is really great for gaming, for someone like me with a mix of productivity and gaming workloads, I really wanted more cores. For that reason, the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X really made the most sense for me. 16 cores and 32 threads can't be beat at this price point. And until AMD decides to release a 3D V-Cache chip with 16 cores, I can't see anything else making sense for this mix of workloads. Learning from my past mistakes, I decided to go ATX this time and save myself a lot of hassle. My last ASRock board treated me well, so I went with the ASRock X670E PG Lightning. Modern platforms have so many new features that didn't exist back in 2015. USB-C and NVMe support, along with other niceties like PCIe Gen 5 and 2.5GB networking, are pretty standard features on many modern motherboards, but were completely absent from the market back in 2015. But for me, the biggest upgrade is definitely actually having expansion slots that aren't taken up by my GPU. ATX just makes so much more sense for basically every PC build. Modern CPUs give off a lot of heat, so unlike in the past, liquid coolers actually make a lot of sense today. The Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 280 should do a great job of keeping all 16 cores of my 7950X at a reasonable temperature. RAM is not only much faster but much cheaper than it used to be. 2 16GB sticks of Team T-Create DDR5 at 6400 MHz is more than I could realistically need for any workload. I considered doubling that to 64 gigs, but Zen 4 has some issues running with 4 DIMMs, so I prioritized stability and stuck with 32. SSD storage has made some of the greatest leaps in 9 years. And the dual Crucial P5 Plus 2TB NVMe SSDs I've picked are combined not only cheaper than my old boot drive, but an order of magnitude faster. They're only PCIe Gen 4, but unless you're shelling out for enterprise or data center SSDs, PCIe Gen 5 consumer SSDs are basically a scam at this point. Peak bandwidth may be higher, but in the important random I/O operations that actually matter for day-to-day use, Gen 4 and Gen 5 consumer drives perform similarly. The 5700 XT is a pretty recent card, but AMD has made some very impressive generational leaps, and the 6950 XT outperforms the 5700 XT in every way possible. While not being the most recent generation of Radeon graphics, the 6950 XT has double the VRAM of the 5700 XT at 16, and in terms of rasterization and compute, completely blows it away. With Nvidia's insane current-gen pricing, it's easily one of the best deals available on the market. 520 watts was more than enough to power my last PC, but not only will this new one require much more, learning from my past choice, I wanted to make sure I had enough room for future expandability. The EVGA 1000 GT Supernova should provide clean, reliable power for this PC for years to come, along with potentially future PCs, unless power requirements really jump to where we're putting 240 volt circuits in our homes. There are a lot of great ATX cases out there nowadays, and the black fractal torrent is no exception. Designed to allow much more airflow than my last case, every intake also has a dust filter to make it much easier to clean. Building in it should be pretty straightforward, and should save a lot of effort compared to my prior ITX builds. Taking advantage of ATX's increased expandability, I've added a TP-Link 10 gigabit network card. I don't actually have a 10 gigabit switch yet, but once I do, this should make network transfers much faster and my workflow much quicker. It only requires a 1x PCIe slot, but on many ITX boards not even that is possible. I've also decided to add a Magewell PCIe capture card. Its addition will allow me to capture 1080p HDMI signals, as well as many analog formats, with full 444 chroma. Magewell's Linux drivers are some of the best, which means should I fully switch in the future, I won't have to worry about the driver compatibility. With the parts out of the way, it's finally time to start the build. The first thing to do is to slot in the RAM. This is pretty straightforward, just check the motherboard manual to make sure you're putting the RAM in the right slots. After opening the clips on each side of the RAM slot, even pressure directly down onto the slot on the stick should be enough to seat the RAM properly. Now it's time to install the SSDs. On many motherboards, the first NVMe slot is hidden under a heatsink. Removing the heatsink should generally reveal the highest speed slot as it's closest to the CPU. SSDs are keyed to only go in one way, so after inserting and pushing down the SSD, all that's left to do is screw it in. When replacing the heatsink, make sure you peel the plastic or it defeats the entire purpose of the heatsink being there. If you have multiple SSDs to install like me, check your motherboard manual to see where the second fastest slot is. For me, it's the slot directly after the top GPU slot. Installing the CPU can be nerve-wracking, but is just as easy as the last two steps. Carefully lift up the lever and socket cover to expose the CPU socket. Make sure the triangle on the corner of the CPU and the corner of the socket is aligned, and then carefully lower it in. Give it a little wiggle to make sure it's seated. Close the socket cover, and then push down on the lever with even pressure. This may take more force than you expect, but if you align the CPU properly, there's nothing to worry about. Once the socket cover pops off, you're done. I always place the socket cover back over the CPU to protect it from a dropped screw or anything else that could scratch the IHS. This case has a top mount power supply, making power supply installation the next logical step. Since this is a modular power supply, I insert all the cables I could possibly need to power all the devices that will be in this PC. I don't omit many cables, since in this case there's plenty of room for extras to hide behind the backside panel. After quickly routing the cables through the channel in the top, I screw the 4 power supply screws in, completing the installation. Since I'm water cooling my CPU, the default fan arrangement of the case won't work and I need to rearrange all the fans. This is pretty straightforward and all you have to do is remove all the fan screws. Here's a look at the final arrangement with the AIO in the front as an intake and a rear exhaust. Installing the motherboard might be the easiest step yet. This motherboard has an integrated I/O shield, and this case comes pre-configured with the standoffs in the right spots for ATX. Installing the motherboard is as simple as screwing it in. Now it's time to mount the AIO to the CPU. Since most coolers support a wide variety of CPU sockets, the instructions can seem pretty complicated. Just take your time and follow them and you shouldn't have any problems. Just don't forget to add thermal paste and peel the plastic protector off the CPU block. I'm sure everyone's made that mistake at least once. After plugging in some cables, we're most of the way done with this build. Now let's add the two old SATA SSDs I have from older builds. This case's 2.5-inch drive mounts are located on the back on these little trays. Removing them is pretty straightforward. All you have to do now is screw the SSD into the tray, and then reinstall it back into the case. All that's left to do is to install the GPU and other expansion cards. When having multiple expansion cards in a build like me, best practice is to check the motherboard manual to see where the lanes are allocated to physically. After removing PCIe slot covers, the card should slot right in. Then just screw the cards in and connect power if needed. After closing up the case and peeling the side panel, it's time to see if the system posts. We post with no errors and the build is finally done. Well, how much faster is the new PC than the old one really? I did some quick, unscientific benchmarks for a simple comparison. For a productivity benchmark, I chose Cinebench 2024. In the single-threaded test, my old PC scored 67 points, and the new build scored 119. Almost double. In the multi-threaded test, the old PC managed a score of 260, while the new PC managed 2085, nearly 10 times the performance. The most surprising result so far is the Cinebench GPU test. The old PC managed a score of 5129, while the new PC scored 11257, double the performance again. For a gaming workload, I chose the Unigen Superposition benchmark. At 4K, the old PC did quite well with a score of 7773, but the new PC absolutely trounced it with a score of 17931. Neither PC can really handle 8K, and the old PC only puts up a score of 3221. With how GPU-bound 8K is, the gulf narrows and the new PC only manages a score of 6606. To make things fairer on the old PC, I decided to pick a benchmark more contemporary to the time it was built, in this case 3D Mark 11. The old PC does well here, putting up a respectable score of 11477. Unfortunately, the age of the benchmark didn't do the old PC any favors, and the new PC managed to double its performance with a score of 23201. While these are hardly the most scientific benchmarks ever ran, they do give us a good idea of the performance difference between the old and new PC. In games, the performance gained is about double, while in productivity it could be up to 10 times as fast. That may seem like a lot, but considering the 9-year age gap, the old PC has held up really well, all things considered. I'm really happy with how the new build turned out, and I can't wait to start using it to make more videos. Thanks for watching.